Hey folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier. Unfortunately, this is your buddy Mike Messier. Unfortunately, yesterday we had another premature death. Del Wilkes, known as the Patriot, known as the Trooper, and a lot of times just known as Del Wilkes, is a pro wrestler, passed away at the age of 59. And it caught me off guard yesterday, and I thought yesterday to do a media tribute video, but you know, I got a little overwhelmed because we've experienced Butch Reed passing away. So many other great wrestlers have passed away recently that it's almost becoming too common and too hurtful, to be honest. It was just a couple of months ago that the Patriot and Marcus Alexander Bagwell were guests on the Monty and the Pharaoh show out of Long Island, New York, and I was watching that show and just kind of commenting and having a good time, you know, as the Patriot was right there in studio with Monty and the Pharaoh. So here we are, just a few months later, and Del Wilkes has passed away. Now I'm old enough to remember pretty much most of his career, except with the exception of the All Japan Pro Wrestling. I'm not too familiar with Del's work in Japan as the Patriot, except that I know that he was one of the Americans that really got over big in Japan, and his work in Japan apparently was what impressed the WWE office to bring him in 1997, in late 1997. And Bruce Pritchard obviously knew the Patriot Del Wilkes from their time together in Global. How I first became aware of Del Wilkes in professional wrestling was actually in his previous incarnation as the Trooper. And I always thought the Trooper was a great character, a great pro wrestling character. It was unique. It was simple. It was like a state trooper, you know, and he would write tickets to his fallen opponents, usually job guys that he would beat. He would write them a little ticket. And I just thought it was kind of a cool thing, something that easily could have worked with the WWF at that time. This was 1988, 89. Interestingly enough, the Trooper started teaming up with another guy, and Del Wilkes, by the way, was in phenomenal condition. Back in the day when, you know, guys like Billy Jack Haynes, Kerry Von Erich, you know, the mid-'80s guys, and now we're getting into the late '80s. There's a lot of emphasis on big muscular guys, you know what I mean? So the Trooper and DJ Peterson were DJ Peterson, another wrestler we've kind of forgotten about, but DJ Peterson and the Trooper were a tag team. They were a babyface team. They were going up against the Destruction Crew for the AWA World Tag Team title, recently caught on the WWE Network before the network became the Peacock situation here in the United States. There's a great match from Super Clash 4, a cage match with the Trooper and DJ Peterson against the Destruction Crew, which is Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos. For some of you wrestling fans, you might remember Mike Enos was the guy that was wrestling. Hey, good, how are you? When Scott Hall came out during Nitro, Mike Enos was in the middle of a wrestling match. So just some really interesting things there. Now, as far as the rest of other memories I have, when the AWA folded up, it would have been logical to think that the Trooper would go over to the WWF at the time. This would be around 1991, but he did not. Instead, he ended up in the Global Wrestling Federation, where he was kind of the big man on campus for a while. He won their title tournament. I remember reading about this in a wrestling magazine, that he won a tournament, and his opponent in the finals of this tournament, Al Perez, I believe, had his foot on the bottom rope when the count was made. And the Trooper, being the Trooper, could not accept the Global Wrestling Federation World Heavyweight title because his opponent, Al Perez, who was a heel, had his foot in the rope. So they had to, you know, he would not accept it. So they had to do a rematch of the tournament final like a week or two later. And I believe, you know, he won. The Patriot won and won the title anyway. So just really putting the babyface shine on him. There was this other thing going on that they brought in. I believe it was supposed to be Doug Gilbert as the Dark Patriot, which they did. They had a feud between the Dark Patriot and the Patriot. I guess the Dark Patriot actually won that feud and out Del Wilkes went. But I remember there was a brief time, folks, in 1991 where you had the WWF was by far the dominant wrestling promotion in the United States. WCW was number 2, but they were struggling because Flair had left. And believe it or not, Global Wrestling Federation out of Texas was the number 3 wrestling promotion because they had time on ESPN. So the Patriot got a lot of airtime on that show and was really the top guy in the number 3 promotion in the US of A. Next stop, he did, like I said, he did a bunch of stuff in Japan. I'm not too familiar with his Japan work, except that he did get over. Adam's checking in. Adam's making a reference to Hulk Hogan as the Patriot. Well, that would come years later. I think that was called Mr. America, by the way. But going back to our buddy, the Patriot, Del Wilkes, then we see him kind of re-emerging, at least for me. Like I said, his Japan stuff I wasn't too familiar with. He emerges in World Championship Wrestling in 1994. He's teaming up in Stars and Stripes with Marcus Alexander Bagwell. They're able to win the tag team title. They're feuding with Pretty Wonderful. Now, here's the thing. If Pretty Wonderful had been a like Steven Regal and Bobby Eaton, would have been a really, because they were doing that British gimmick. If they had been feuding with them for the title, the Patriot might have gotten more over. But Orndorff and Roma were not foreign menace heels. They were, pretty boy heels. So it's kind of hard to get over the Stars and Stripes team when they're feuding with other Americans. You know what I mean? So just a thought. But, at that time, it seems like they could have easily broken off the Patriot for a singles run in WCW. For whatever reason, they didn't. Maybe that just wasn't in the cards. Maybe Del himself wasn't pushing for that. Who knows? But they were a successful tag team. Bagwell had a lot of great tag teams in that era. I think he had already teamed with Too Cold Scorpio and won a couple of tag belts. Here he's teaming up with the Patriot, and Bagwell would go on to team up with Scotty Riggs. But at the time, the Stars and Stripes was a pretty damn good team. And they had 2 title runs, eventually losing, apparently, to Harlem Heat. Then, once again, he would leave. The Patriot would leave. Yeah, it is sad news, Chris. Thanks for checking in, buddy. And then we would see the Patriot would kind of go away for a couple more years, go back to Japan, I am assuming. And then we saw him again kind of out of nowhere showing up in WWF. And at the time, WWF was kind of at a loss for babyface contenders for Stone Cold because Stone Cold Steve Austin was injured. So Bret Hart was the heel champion. He was doing the anti-American thing, being the Canadian champion, the hero of Canada, Bret Hart. So they needed someone to counter that. And with Steve Austin injured, they really kind of just brought in someone from the outside. They immediately put the Patriot into kind of the top babyface in the promotion. What I remember about this era, guys, was for whatever reason, they were showing him without his mask quite a bit. Like he was doing a lot of promotions, like teasers of the Patriot, taking his mask off kind of liberally. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, why would you have a guy who the quality of his mask was very high, by the way. Like he had a really good, slick-looking, patriotic mask. They could have sold thousands of those to kids, but for whatever reason, they just showed him kind of liberally without his mask. I think they even used the Del Wilkes name. Apparently, McMahon doesn't really like to promote masked wrestlers. And so I think it was a struggle between Bruce Pritchard, who's, I believe, talked about this on his podcast, and Vince McMahon himself. Like Vince he wanted the Patriot, but he didn't want the Patriot. He didn't want the whole masked mystery guy. He just wanted some generic babyface. And unfortunately, it kind of felt that way. It felt like they weren't really sure what they were doing with this guy, but they were giving him a world title match on a pay-per-view, which he ended up losing cleanly by submission to Bret Hart. Not the best way to get over a babyface contender is to have him submit. If they had the Patriot get pinned with some type of cheap maneuver, that would have been better. But it was another thing where, McMahon sometimes doesn't seem like he knows what he wants. And that was pretty much it. I mean, the Patriot, we've heard for a couple of years that the Honky Tonk Man bought the gimmick or tried to buy the gimmick, and Honky Tonk Man somehow was giving the gimmick or selling through a third party to Tom Brandy. So there's all this kind of stuff going around. I never bought anyone but Del Wilkes as the Patriot. As a matter of fact, I liked him better as a Trooper. I think the Trooper was just a cool gimmick. It wasn't so spot on. You know, like the Patriot is very, it's a good gimmick, don't get me wrong. It's a great mask. But I thought because there was nothing wrong with the face of Del Wilkes, a good-looking, rugged, handsome guy, why not have him be the Trooper? And to me, the Trooper was just more of a cool thing. Yes, I did mention that, Chris. Chris is mentioning the tag team title run. I did mention that. All that crap Conrad said to Del Wilkes ended up being the end of him. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Adam. With I'm assuming you're thinking of CONRAD THOMPSON. I know that I listened to, I believe it was Conrad and Bruce. Didn't they do either a whole episode about the Patriot or about Global Wrestling Federation? I'm not sure if it was a dedicated Patriot thing. Like I said, Patriot was always a guy that when he came around, you're like, yeah, this guy's cool. You know, he could be a top guy, but it seemed like for whatever reason, in WWF, he didn't get that big push. He did get the big push, but they didn't really stick with him. And, you know, there's something to be said that if he had lost that match to Bret Hart through some cheap heel tactics, they could have done more with them. If, you know, put him in a feud with British Bulldog or Owen or something, but it just seems like they were just using him as a placeholder because Steve Austin was injured. Like I said, Del's politics, different than mine, but that's fine. I thought Del was a cool guy. I thought he spoke very well on that Monty and the Pharaoh show, so shout out to those guys. I'm sure they're thinking about Del at this time. And to his friends and family, 59 is a tough thing to pass away that young at a heart attack. I don't know. I mean, I just feel like another thing we'll remember about the Patriot is that Kurt Angle ended up using the Patriot's music, like the 1997 Patriot music for WWF is what Kurt Angle used, you know, two or 3 years later. So every time you would hear Kurt Angle, you kind of have a little memory of the Patriot, which I think is nice. My favorite Patriot memories as far as wrestling, oddly enough, I did like that, you know, he was kind of at the top of two pay-per-views, his Brett title match, and then I guess a month later, he teamed up with Ken Shamrock against Bulldog and Owen. I thought those two matches, the tag team and the singles, were good. And also the Stars and Stripes. And also, I can't really pinpoint an exact match, but the Global Wrestling Federation run, I think that was probably his best run. I feel bad. Once again, the Patriot, sad news. Thanks, guys, for checking in. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. Just did a video about the best shark films. If you're into shark films, me and Carl Cotty explored some shark films. I'm going to go see a movie tonight, The Summer of Soul. It's a documentary about a film, a music festival from 1969 that apparently this footage is just unarchived. Thanks again for everybody for checking in. Patriot, we appreciate your service as a wrestler, as an American, as a Patriot, and as a Trooper too. So everybody stay strong, stay safe. Watch your driving this weekend. A lot of people are going to be on the road. So watch your driving, drive safe. Mike Messier, thanks for watching, everybody.